You know, what does a presidential scandal, the collapse of a superpower, and a horrifying act of terrorism all have in common? Well, they were all tests, big ones, challenges that completely reshaped modern America. Today, we're going to dive into that wild journey, a story of how the nation was tried, tested, and totally transformed from the 1970s all the way to the early 2000s. So, how did America actually get through all of this? I mean, it's a story that starts with the country questioning its own government and ends with it fighting a brand new kind of enemy. How in the world did we get from there to here? Let's break it down. All right, so our story doesn't start with some foreign threat. Nope. It starts with a crisis that came from the very top, from inside the house. This was a test of trust, a time that made Americans ask a really hard question. What do you do when you can't believe your own leaders? This piece of the timeline right here really captures the beginning of that doubt. We kick things off with President Nixon, a leader whose name, let's be honest, became forever linked with one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history. See, the Watergate scandal wasn't just some simple break-in. It was a whole web of secrets and lies that went all the way to the top. When a president is forced to resign in disgrace, that deeply held belief in the integrity of your leaders, it just shatters. The question on everyone's mind was, who can we possibly trust now? So, into this massive storm of mistrust steps President Ford. His job was pretty clear. Just try to calm everything down, bring back some sense of normalcy after all the chaos of Watergate. But that kind of damage, it's not easy to fix. Ford really did try to steady the ship, but the faith of the American people had been seriously shaken. And that crack in the national confidence, it would be felt for years and years to come. This new vulnerability at home had a direct impact on how the world saw America. And just like that, the next big test arrived, this time on the world stage. It was all about reestablishing American strength and figuring out how to deal with an increasingly dangerous planet. Now, this section of our timeline, wow, it shows a huge shift in focus. We go from what was seen as weakness during the Carter years to the really assertive, muscular foreign policy of Reagan and George H.W. Bush, a total 180. The Iran hostage crisis was just a defining and, let's be real, humiliating moment. For 444 days, the whole world watched as America seemed totally powerless to free its own citizens. This created a powerful feeling of American weakness and a deep national hunger for much stronger leadership. And that hunger for stronger leadership led directly to the Reagan era. His approach was a direct answer to that feeling of weakness, a really clear three-step strategy. First, build up the military in a massive way. Second, put intense pressure on the Soviet Union. And the result of all that? He helped bring the Cold War to an end. So, with America's main rival, the Soviet Union, basically crumbling, the U.S. suddenly found itself in a position it had never been in before. President George H.W. Bush now had to figure out what it even meant to be the world's only superpower. And that new role was put to the test, and fast, during the Gulf War. By leading a huge global coalition, America showed its power decisively. That was the moment that really seemed to cement the nation's new identity, the world's protector, the undisputed global leader. But, being the only superpower on the block brings its own set of challenges. The 1990s were a time of incredible connection and economic boom, but it was also a time when threats started popping up from completely new and unexpected places. This part of the timeline really captures the two sides of the 90s perfectly. On one hand, you've got the incredible promise of globalization under President Clinton, but on the other, the horrifying discovery that the most immediate dangers weren't always from somewhere else. The Clinton years were really all about this new kind of interconnectedness. The internet was exploding, new trade deals were being signed. It really felt like the world was shrinking, becoming this one giant connected market of goods and ideas. So what did all this actually mean for everyday life? Well, communication was suddenly instant. Stuff from all over the world got cheaper. But this new, super connected world also got a whole lot more complex and unpredictable. Then, right in the middle of this decade of what felt like peace and prosperity, a shocking act of violence. The bombing of a federal building in Oklahoma City. It wasn't done by a foreign power. It was done by an American. And this introduced a terrifying new phrase into the national conversation: terrorism at home. It was this deep, chilling realization that devastating threats could come from inside America's own borders. It totally shattered that long-held sense of being safe at home. This new reality really set the stage for our final section. And this is a moment so big that it draws a line in history. There's a before and there's an after. Because after decades of tests, from inside and out, the ultimate test was about to arrive.
September 11th, 2001. It's a date that really, it needs no explanation. It was a coordinated attack that didn't just hit buildings, it hit the nation's entire sense of safety, its feeling of being untouchable.
Under a new president, George W. Bush, the United States was attacked in a way it had never been before. The era of feeling safe behind two giant oceans was just over. This was it, the ultimate test. The response was immediate, and it went in two directions at once. Abroad, it kicked off the War on Terror, sending troops into Afghanistan and later Iraq to fight new kinds of enemies. And back here at home, it meant a massive expansion of security, at airports, in government surveillance, completely redefining the balance between freedom and safety. You know, when you look back at this whole journey from Watergate all the way to 9/11, it becomes so clear that America didn't just randomly change. Each of these challenges, the scandal, the global pressure, the new threats, was a test that forced a reaction, a change, a national reset. So we're left with this really powerful question at the end of it all. After all the turmoil, the wars, the new security measures, did all of these tests and the way America responded to them actually make the nation safer? Or did they simply make it a fundamentally different country, one that's still trying to figure out the legacy of those tests today? That's the big question this era leaves us with.